Okay, in today's video I'm going to do a landscape tutorial. The colours that I'm going to use for this tutorial will be down in the description. There are codes that if you put into this app, this program Procreate on the iPad, you can go into the colour section, onto the values, and there is a section here where you can put the hexadecimal codes. So you type them in there, press enter, and then you can start to piece together the exact colour palette that I'm going to use for this tutorial. In terms of brushes, I'm going to use the airbrush. I'll probably use a combination of the different settings, but I'm going to stick it onto medium and soft airbrush for the majority of the piece. I've got an A4 canvas open. I've not changed the settings. That is the default setting here on Procreate. So if you follow all of those things, you'll be working exactly the same way that I'm working myself during this tutorial. For those people that support me over at Patreon, there is a downloadable color palette. So rather than have to copy all the code, you can just download the file and you're good to go. Okay, so to begin with, I'm going to create something of a background, the sky area on the landscape. And within my color selection, I've already kind of selected the colors that I'm going to use. I've been looking at different photographs and I've narrowed it down to a particular color range that I think is going to be useful. Okay, so the very first thing that I'm going to do on my color selection is choose the darkest blue, and I've got the soft airbrush selected, and I'm just going to create a sweep of that blue right at the top. So I can turn the opacity up a little bit more actually, get a bank of that blue in place. And I'm going to use all three of these blues that are in the first colour selections here. I'm just going to try and manually blend them to some degree, but then I've also got the assistance of the Gaussian blur adjustment tool on here as well that I will fully utilise. And I'm going to go for the lightest blue as well there. So I'm going to feed that into the bottom just to try and blend the three different types of blue together. And if you're not happy with the way that they have blended, you don't feel it's a very smooth transition, which to be honest I wouldn't do looking at it. I could work into it until I'm absolutely fine, but a quicker way perhaps is just to go to the Gaussian blur and move it along somewhat until you're happier with the blend. I also want to adjust this upwards so it's a slightly narrower strip as well. Okay, I'm going to create another layer, and on this layer I'm going to introduce some of the lighter colours and the warmer colours. So I'm going to start over on the warmer end. So I'm going to go skip this middle one and I'm going to go for the first warmer colour, and I'm going to introduce this down near the bottom of the sky. So as we sort of get towards the horizon, we're going to swap from cool colours and we're going to start adding some warm colours instead. I'm going to go to the next colour along, which is a much more vibrant yellow. And then last of all, we're going to have the kind of pinky red colour. Maybe turn the size of the brush down a little bit. Something like this. And then same trick again, I'm going to use the Gaussian blur, blur them in slightly. We're just after an effect initially, and that will do. I'm going to return to that sky and adjust it further at a later point, but I want to start moving on to the other details, and like I say, I will go back to it and refine it later on in the tutorial. But the next layer I'm going to use, I'm going to start creating some of the distant landscape features. So the first colour I've got is a similar kind of colour to the sky, but a slightly more vibrant version of it. So I want to create something of a slightly sharper edge as it meets the horizon here. We're going to have a band that goes all the way across. And if you really want to create actually a straight line, if it's important that you get a really straight horizon, you can, as one motion, take it all the way across, and then by holding it, it snaps to a straight line. So you're guaranteed then to get a really nice straight line horizon. So I'll do that again right from the edge. In fact, I'm going to pinch in just so I can do it right from the edge. Take it from one side to the other, hold it, and you'll see you get a nice neat line now all the way across. If you think that it's too rigid, too exacting, you can always use that as a guide and just rough it up slightly by going across, and that way you sort of get the best of both effects that way. And we're going to just sort of blend it in a little bit, let it blend down, and I'm going to move to the next colour, which is a lighter blue, and we're just going to blend those in together a little bit. I'm going to move along to this purpley colour, and I think I want to just maybe at the top have the warmer colours blending with that purple tone. Like I say, I'm going to go back into all these layers, including the sky, and continue to work. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to go back to that sky color, and I'm realizing now that I need more of that pink. I need that pinky color to be a little bit more prominent and blending with that purple. So I'm going back and I'm having the two mingle a little bit more effectively to create a much more convincing, a nicer effect. And maybe go back to the yellow as well and have the impact of that yellow a little bit stronger. I am going to add a sunspot onto this as well, so where the sun is going to be in the sky, but I just want to get the colours right first before I add some things so vibrant as the sun itself. So now that I'm a little happier with that, I'm going to go back to the layer I was just working on, and I'm going to start using these colours again. So I'm going back to the slightly paler blue, and I'm just going to bring some of this colour a little bit further down. You may not see some of this, but I think to get rid of the white is often useful. It's very much a distraction. You don't get to see the full effect of the colours until you've got rid of that white area. If you want to make sure that you're always notified of these tutorials, please remember to press the subscribe button and press the little bell notification next to it as well. If you want to subscribe to or requested to add me on Instagram, you can do. There is a button on my main profile page as well, and I will always notify people whenever I'm putting up a tutorial. So you get told straight away, so you can get to watch it as soon as it's uploaded. So I'm going to go back to the purpley colour. I'm just looking at these now. That's too big a brush. I'm just going back to the way it transitions from there to there, and I'm just going to soften that slightly. Okay, I think the next detail I'm going to do on another layer, and I'm going to move along to the next colour along, and I'm going to create something of some features in the landscape. Perhaps I'm going to change brush at this point to a medium airbrush. Now it's not the airbrush at the top, the thinner ones, it is the wider ones. It doesn't really make a lot of difference, because even on these ones you can increase the size of the brush, so they're pretty big anyway. I think that the ones down at the underneath rather give a little bit more variety, so you can still go to a tiny brush size, but you can also go a lot bigger. So I just like the versatility of using this slightly bigger version of it. But I'm going to turn the opacity up, and I'm going to create something of a range of mountains in the distance. In fact, I'm not happy with that colour. I'm going to go to this blue along here. I think I'm going to use that just to start to map out some of these. I think the combination of the two will actually probably work better than either one of them on their own. Okay, so once you've created that kind of distant set of mountains, then I'm going to go back to the more purpley colour and to that dark blue colour, and I'm going to use a combination of the two of them, and I'm going to use it just to help define the top of that mountain range a little bit. So at the very top and along the edges of some of them, it's just going to be a little bit clearer, more clearly defined. And I'm just going to go back to the slightly lighter version here. I'm going to allow, in fact not quite the lighter one, the darker one. I'm going to just try and blend them in a little bit more effectively here. I'm also going to go back to the purple. I'm going to use a combination of these colours together. Now I'd like a kind of sense that there's different ranges of these mountains. So I've only really created the effect of one particular sort of level of depth of mountains. So I'm going to be using these colours just to create a sense that there's some mountains that are a little bit further back, in addition to the ones we've just created there. And we can use the lighter colour perhaps to create some sense that there's maybe as the mountain gets lower down, there's some low-lying mist perhaps. Likewise with these, as they come further down towards the bottom, you might find they get a little bit lighter. Again, you can really sort of swap between these different colours. When you want to get some finer details, pick out the top of some of these so they stand out a little bit more clearly. Make some bits jump out so they appear nearer to you as the viewer. Press on a bit more, get a little bit darker at the top, let them fade back out as they go further down, but maybe at the peaks of these mountains they need to be a little bit darker so they jump forward a little bit more than the ones that are behind over there. But generally speaking, you can see it's darker at the peak and then it fades down and gets lighter. And you can create as many layers of these as you'd like. You can either do them on the one layer on your painting, or you can do them all on separate layers if you think you're going to want to adjust them and you might make mistakes. Do them on separate layers, it's safer that way. I might create another layer of mountains here. Perhaps use a slightly softer brush for this. I'm going to go back to the soft airbrush. I can always sharpen up the top of the details like I did a moment ago. So I'm not happy with that colour. I'm going to go back to the purple colours. One of the reasons I'm adding a bit more warmth into this region is I'm imagining the sunlight to be somewhere in this area. So whenever you get closer to the actual sun, the warmth of the piece, you're going to get some slightly more warm colours as a general rule as well. So that's why I'm going cooler over here and slightly warmer over in this area. So just to double down on that idea, I'm going to go back to this area and really exaggerate some of the more colder colours and the blue colours. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. All these details I will go back on, but I just need to forge forward, create the overall effect, then I can go back and refine them a little bit more. We've got some darker colours at this point, so I've got a really nice sort of brown colour, which is going to be one of the colours mixed with the blue. That's going to help really create a more foreground detail. So we're going to have a mountain range here, so again I need to check my brush. I'm going to go to the medium brush again, slightly darker and a slightly sharper edge to it. So I think I'm going to put a mountain that's more prominent in this area. So the fact that I've not got the colour on full opacity means that as I'm kind of sketching out the forms, you're getting texture put in there straight away, which is useful. It might be that you want to change the texture, but if you put it on full opacity, then your colours end up completely flat, which is not useful at all. So by having the opacity down somewhat to begin with, you're more likely to find it easier to create a sense that there's different layers, there's texture. So when you do one range of mountains here, for example, and it's not on full opacity, and then you do another one here and you go over it more, then you've already created the effect that there's two areas, one more foreground and one more distant. So on that basis, it's probably best to keep your brush strokes in the direction that you imagine the texture to be actually forming on the mountain side. So if you imagine the direction of any landslides or actual textural marks to be going on the side of a mountain, and keep the brush marks going in the direction that you imagine those are going to appear. So if I start doing them that way now, it's not going to make any sense, for example. Now you might get two sections of mountains that sort of one going this way and another one that cuts across it, in which case you need to bear that in mind so you're having a change of direction. Again, as well as the actual opacity of your brush, you need to bear in mind you're using the Apple Pencil, I presume. And if you are using the Apple Pencil, then it has the ability to press on and it has pressure sensitivity. So use that to your advantage as well. It's not just about the opacity, it's about how hard you press on with the actual pencil, just like you would do if you were using real pencils in the real world. Now obviously that varies slightly from perhaps the effect you would get with a paintbrush. So yeah, it's closer to perhaps the effect you would get with an actual pencil, which I suppose is right because it's called a pencil and not a brush. So like I say, I'm quite deliberately keeping this quite textured because it's just going to help your imagination start to see features on a mountainside if it's not already very flat. As soon as it becomes quite flat, you're going to struggle to imagine some of those details a little bit more. So now that I've got something on there using that kind of brown colour, I'm going to go back to the bluey tones and I'm going to start using that as well on the side of the mountain. So we're getting a nice combination between the blue and the brown working together. So we've got quite a lot of stone on this mountain, as well as organic matter, so that is what provides perhaps the two different colours. I will also use this very lighter colour and just a bit more sparingly start to add a bit of texture in there as well. Just some dashes, dots, again keeping with the direction of the slope of the mountain, not overdoing it in any particular area. This is predominantly on the shaded side because I'm going to do the sunlight here, so this is on the shaded side, so it's going to appear cooler, but you don't want it to be overly light either like that, because actually it's in the shadow. So I'm going to swap and change between those two different colours, and to a certain extent there's no right and wrong with this. It's whatever looks right to your eye a little bit. Now admittedly this is going to be a slightly more challenging feature perhaps for some people to have a go at, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a go at it. It just, adding texture and trying to find the right balance of texture and form is something that without textural brushes, which to be honest I don't think necessarily help with some examples, then getting the texture right is going to be what looks right to your eye really. Now I'm just going to create a little bit of a blanket area down here. I can go back into it and add more colour, and I will definitely go back and refine some of the detail. I just want to shut down this light area at the bottom of the frame. Now I'm going to create another layer. Like I say, I will keep going back over these details, or I will go back near the end just to fine tune, get some better details in there as well. But I need to keep plowing forward, and I'm going to move to the bottom layer now. I'm going to use some of the colours that are in that layer, perhaps for some of the stone colour, some of the cool areas that I need in there, but I'm going to use a lot of these warmer colours. I'm adding a lot of sort of grassy areas that are picking up the warm light that's going to be in here. This will make more sense when I do add the sunlight onto it, but I'm going to start building it up at this point anyway. So I've got some green kind of mossy colour that I'm going to start adding into what I think will be the much more foreground detail area. So I'm keeping it quite blotchy deliberately. So I'm imagining that when the grass is in the shaded areas, then it's going to reveal more of this kind of greeny, it's still quite a warm colour, and it certainly looks quite orangey next to the blue, but compared to the other colours that I'm going to use, which are here, it's going to look much duller and much greener by contrast. So I'm going to use it in quite a kind of blotchy manner to begin with. I just want to create a sense of there's a slope going up and over here as well. Okay, so I'm going to switch to one of the other colours that's here. I've got a range, there's two oranges that are quite similar. One's a slightly more ready version. I'm just going to mix and match between them. So what I want to do now is create the effect that on top of the tufts now, we're picking up the light that's being emitted from over here. So again, this will make much more sense once I start to put the sun in over there as well. So we're going to use perhaps the slightly more ready colour that's here and that orange as well, and I'm just going to highlight the top edge of these tufts. So that red is a little bit too strong. Now that I see it in situ, it looks a little bit too exaggerated, so I'm going to do more with the orangey colours. I might use a hint of that red colour in places, but I think the orange is working perhaps a little bit better. So now that I've got just a few highlights in the green areas, I'm going to show you an effect that I can do on the layer if I put it underneath what I've just done, and I go to a really dark colour now. Now I haven't really got a colour that's quite dark, and I forgot this brown, but it's not going to work, so I think I probably will need to create yet another layer. So if I just go to a darker version, plonk it on the end there, and now just by putting that behind, then it should start to help reveal some of the things that I've just put down, create some shadows. I don't want too many shadows, but it's going to really help add a bit of contrast in there as well. But I don't want too much of that. I'm going to go back over it and add a lot more of the highlights back in. Now it actually helps me see that perhaps I've got a bit too much of the green still, so I need to go back to my oranges, and I need to start going over these, make sure I'm on the right layer again. So I'm on the layer on top, turn the brush size down yet again, and I want to really start adding a lot more of this orange to the top areas of these grass tufts. So if I just keep some, rather than individual tufts, I can keep some sort of stripes and bands of this area. It's going to help sell the idea that it's going further back over there as well. So the red will be useful in places, because if I turn the opacity down and just go over it in areas, I think it's going to add a nice effect. Some of that warmth perhaps needs to be a little stronger in areas. So you don't just want one type of orange, one type of red. You want a little bit of variation in there, which is a bit nicer. As well as these, you can go back to the other colours. You could even go back to the sky colours, to be honest, and pick one of the more grey blues and start to pick out maybe some texture, maybe tufts of grass appear on the rocks. So you can have a mixture of fragmented texture for the rock on which the tufts of grass are actually growing. So I'm doing lots of dots, lots of individual points of contact using this brush. It's important to leave some black gaps between it. You don't want to overdo it, because if you did it too consistently, you did a consistent sort of blocks all the way along, it's not going to look realistic. So leave some areas where you don't have any detail at all. Have it as an empty black area. Other bits they might join together and create a kind of constant, and other times it's going to be more fragmented, just sort of blobs. We're not zooming in on this. I'm trying to do the whole piece zoomed out just to create the effect, because actually I feel that the effect is a more important thing to try and get your head around, and details can always be mastered in time, but if you don't get the overall effect right, then it doesn't matter how good some of the details are if the overall effect isn't working. So as well as the highlights for the individual tufts, perhaps they need a shadow as well. So I'm using the brown colour to go behind the tufts. I've got the green, but sometimes the green is just not dark enough. So if I've got a tuft there, for example, maybe it casts a shadow. Now you're not going to notice it when it gets too far in the distance. They're all going to just blend together, and all you're going to really notice in the distance is the actual highlights. But when you get in more towards the foreground, the actual individual tufts perhaps have a shadow as well. So again, I'm going to go back to my bluey grey colours. I'm going to start adding some of those in here, some of the rock features that might be amongst the grass. Quite a time consuming piece this. Sometimes I do tutorials and it's a relatively straightforward, quite a quick fix. This is not one of those. This is one of the more complex, time consuming pieces, and I've done a few of these in a row now. Some of my earlier tutorials were a little bit easier, arguably. So it's worth checking through my tutorials, and perhaps even some of the older ones as well as the newest ones, and just go for one that you think you'd be able to tackle, if not this one. And like I say, one of the complications of a piece like this is the texture itself. Now, on some of the simpler ones that I've done, there's less in the way of texture. You might just get soft transitions and a kind of hazy landscape. This isn't really so much like that. It has more noticeable texture, and it's that becomes a little bit trickier. Now, I know that some people like to use different kinds of brushes and it helps them create these textures, but I don't honestly believe, I don't feel that is going to help in many landscape features like this. So it is important to master the technique of trying to build up texture manually. There's just no getting around it at times. So I'm going to go back to that layer and I'm going to start working in some more of those textures. Now, that was roughly the layer of colours and textures, but there's nothing wrong with dipping into the other rows of colours as well. I'm just going to use this blue, but I'm also going to use the one above it now, just to start to pick out some little features amongst the sort of the mountain. Sometimes when your colours sort of interact with each other, so you get a colour that's in here and it also might be coming from the sky, then it can sometimes help connect the two zones, the two different areas together a little bit as well. But really, sometimes you just have to be a little subtle with the use of it and sparing with it too. Okay, one of the colours I'm going to perhaps start introducing a little bit more is the pinky colour up here. I'm going to turn the opacity way down and I'm going to just start to introduce it into the mountain range that's here, because it's going to have a hazy kind of lighting coming from the sun that's slightly further up. So I'm only just doing a light touch of that just to soften the darker colours that are coming in there and create a sense that there's light coming from this area generally. So I'm only pressing on lightly with this. I'm creating, as you can see, a sort of round area. So it's partially touching the side of the mountain, but also it's creating like a halo effect, which is going to be around the sun here as well. So on that basis, I'm going to go to the layer that had the lightest colour on it, the warmest colour in the sky. I'm going to go for the lightest yellow, turn the opacity up, and I'm going to choose my sun area, which is going to be here. Probably going to push that to as white as we can get it for the very centre. Go to my soft airbrush, turn the opacity down, try again, turn the brush up, try again, and it's going to help break that in a little bit more as well. In fact, I think that's a little bit too much. I'm going to turn the size of the brush down, turn the opacity down, try again. I can always then go on to my other colours like the yellow, and I could start feeding more of that in as well around the edges. In fact, I think I might create another layer. I'm going to put it way on top because I want to make sure that it really is above everything else, and I just want to add a bit more of that yellow into this area. Likewise, I'm going to go to I've already got a pinky colour there that I'm going to use. Let's try that. Turn the opacity down, just try and blend the two together a little bit more there. That's too wide, that band. That works a bit more effectively. Go over this area, blend the two in a little bit more. Try it again. Yeah, happy with that. I feel like it's bringing the two kind of zones together a little bit more effectively. Again, I'm going to go to my white, turn the opacity way up. I'm just going to exaggerate that white area just a little bit more. Okay, so I'm a bit happy with that white. I'm just going to go underneath it, maybe, and just introduce a bit more of the yellow, interrupting that area too. Now, in terms of these lighter colours, I'm going to go for this one at the very end now. I've not used it much on the actual tufts of grass, but I'm going to use it now. I'm still on that top layer. These are some of the last sort of top details of the piece, really. So I'm just going to use it just to highlight the top edge of some of these details. The sun's there, so it's going to pick up on the very top cusp of some of those features in the immediate area underneath the sun. So I don't want to overdo that, but I'm just using it just to highlight some of the top edges a little bit. So I'm not pressing on very hard with this, I'm just using it very lightly, quite subtly, just to highlight some of those shapes that are there. I can also use one of my more orangey colours, extend that effect a little bit more, be a little less subtle perhaps for some of these other areas. Maybe the sun's coming over here as well, just impacting the surface up there. Maybe there's some extra warmth in that side of the mountain in the midst. So again, things like shadows behind the tufts, just to make them stand out as tufts of individual clumps of grass. I'm going to work on the top edge of some of these tufts of grass just to make them stand out a little bit more prominently, make the highlights a bit stronger perhaps in areas. And I'm also going to work into some of the details in these kind of areas too. So I'm introducing more of the purpley colour into this area. Just like I did at the top, there's more blues over here, more warmer colours here. So I'm doing the same pretty much all over the piece in this area, apart from the very foreground bit. I'm going to go up to my darker colours, the lighter colours, and I'm just going to add more points of texture in the main features as well. I am using the darkest colour, the black that I've added on the end there. You can barely see it on the colour palette, but it is there. I'm using it very sparingly. The opacity is pretty low and I'm not pressing on terribly hard, but it helps get some slightly, darker bits of texture in here and there. But I'm using it very subtly, very discreetly. Just with a light touch, I'm just starting to add some bits of dark texture in the mix as well. I'm just darkening up this area of the rocks. I want it to sit a little bit more prominent of the haze effect of that light. I think I want to just make it jump forward a little bit more. Breaking up this area here, so it's a little less flat and featureless. So if you listen to the sound of the pencil, you can really get the idea of the technique, really. Again, I'm going to switch back to my orangey colour. I'm going to pick out some more of these highlights on the tops of the tufts of grass. If you've not already checked out my second channel, I have created a second channel to get more collaborative with the people that subscribe to me over there. So what I tend to do is create a doodle drawing, provide it as a download for the people who watch the videos. They can further work into it and then they can send me the results, and I will showcase them in a future video over the other channel as well. So if you want to know more about that, there is a link for that down in the description. Please feel free to follow that link, subscribe, get involved, and I will definitely showcase your work if you send me the results of what you've had a go at. I've had some really amazing, absolutely amazing pieces of work submitted already, so even if you just want to go and be inspired by what other people have done, it's definitely worth having a look over there. So I did mention on a comment I provided on my community tab that I've actually passed 100,000 subscribers on this channel, which is absolutely amazing to me. I just can't believe it sometimes that I've managed to amass that many subscribers and there's that many people that are interested in what I'm wanting to show people. When I first started out the channel, I was just showcasing my own artwork and I had around 50 subscribers for quite a long period of time, really. And it was only when I started to do a few tutorials that suddenly my channel picked up pace and began to gather thousands, and I just couldn't really, I still can't quite believe that it's taken off to the point that it has. I'm massively grateful for everyone who's stuck with me over the last 3 years and helped me get to this point by commenting, by sharing, by liking my videos, and just loyally coming back and watching all the things that I'm wanting to show people. So I'm massively appreciative of that. I've created a bit of a thank you gift to those people who are interested in seeing one of my finished pieces. It's on my Patreon page. Don't have to become a patron, but it is there as a file. I'm going to create a link to that down in the description, so you can go and download that for free. It's a high resolution version of one of my favourite pieces of work. It's a piece of work that was entirely created on the iPad, so if you are interested, you can go and and download that for free and use it as a wallpaper, or do whatever you want. Print it off onto a canvas, onto a t-shirt. I don't really mind. If you like it, then do what you want with it. As long as you're not selling it, then you're free to do what you want with it. Okay, I could take this a lot further. As I always say with my tutorials, I'm trying to create the overall effect. I'm always time constrained. If I was trying to make this absolutely perfect, I could probably spend another 20 hours on this, fine-tuning the details, but I'm relatively happy with some of the features, some of the details that I've managed to get in a relatively short space of time. I spent about an hour doing this on camera, and I think for the space of time that I've worked on it, I'm quite happy with the result. So on that note, I'm going to leave it where it is for now. Please remember to subscribe, check out my other tutorials, and make sure to come back here when I have another tutorial for you. Thanks for watching, see you later, bye now.